Hello and thank you for joining me for the Conversations with Kay Leadership Lunch Break. Today we're going to look at risk assessment and management theory and practice. So, what is risk assessment? Well, it's one's ability to identify, prioritize, and properly assess risk and its overall impact on daily functions. In risk management, we look at how risks are monitored, minimized, and the impact is controlled on a risk or an opportunity. There are two ways to measure risk. They include a qualitative analysis, which is a mathematical calculation that gives you a numerical value of what you will need to allocate in order to control the risk or opportunity. In a qualitative analysis, we use documentation, current research, or we use a learning database. There are several types of common causes, which include governmental regulations, changes in organizational leadership, unsuccessful project ventures, and legal liabilities. Below you will see several examples of how different causes can affect your risk. For example, in an unintentional or accidental issue, you miss a call because your ringer was turned off. Or in a natural or man-made risk, a tornado wipes out the power plant and the organization has no power. These are two things that you can control or not control, and they provide a significant effect on your organization. So, when we look at a risk, we have to look at how we're going to identify, prioritize, and assess it. And there are several key ways to do that. First, we establish a desired goal and context. This would be the planning stage of your risk. You're looking at what is happening in your internal and external environment. Two, you're going to identify the risk. What were your findings of looking at your internal and external environment? During this time, many people will process map, look at documentation, or perform a program evaluation. Three, we're going to analyze the identified risk and the required activities. This means what are the consequences that you will face associated with this risk? Four, we're actually going to assess the risk. So therefore, we're going to look at our current situation with our previous situation and decide whether or not this risk is at an acceptable or non-acceptable level for where we are. Five, if you choose to take on the risk, we're going to manage the risk by looking at how the outcomes of the risk will be treated and how they will be implemented within our organization. Six, we're going to monitor and control the risk. This means we're keeping track either through data collection or documentation to ensure that the controls are in place and they're effective. At this stage, we also want to make changes as needed to ensure that our risk or opportunity is properly controlled. And seven, we want to have continuous communication of the risk, what our management process is, the solutions, and any findings that are significant or will impact our stakeholders, employees, clients, or people in our personal lives. So what are the common theories and practices? Well, in risk management, there are four things that people generally do. One, we accept the risk. Therefore, we feel that the risk is an acceptable level. We take it on, and we set up things in our organization or our personal life to manage this risk. Another way we could do it is mitigate the risk. This means we're reducing the impact of the risk. We could change what we're doing in our organization to decrease the effect of the risk, or we could just ignore it. Say, I know it's a problem, but it's not a significant problem for me, so therefore I'm not going to invest that much time in it now. I'll wait for it to become a big enough problem. This is not the best thing to do when you're looking at risk. We always want to understand what the risks are and try to implement a plan that's proactive rather than reactive. And lastly, some organizations or people tend to transfer their risk or share their risk with others. An example of this would be taking on a second job to help pay for unpredictable expenses. Or in an organization, if there's a particular project, joining forces or combining your resources with another organization to increase the effectiveness or your placement in the market. Common ways that we assess risk will include a risk matrix or a SWOT analysis. In a SWOT analysis, you're going to look at the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats to your current organization. A pest analysis. We might also look at a cross-impact analysis. In a cross-impact analysis, you're looking at what are the impacts if I take it on versus what are the impacts if I don't take it on or I mitigate the particular risk. We can also look at scenarios of development, or we can bring together an expert panel and talk about what are the effects of the risk and whether or not it's an acceptable level for us to take on. When assessing the risk, you really want to look at what are the critical business or personal activities where my resource or personal time will be significantly affected. Also, you want to look at, is the level of risk really worth the particular consequences, and what are the actual likelihoods of it happening? For instance, what is the likelihood of a tornado touching down in your external environment? If you live in a particular place like Oklahoma where tornadoes are prevalent, it has an increased likelihood. If you live in New York, there aren't many tornadoes that have been present in New York, so therefore the likelihood is less. You also want to look at risk in reference to, is it low, medium, high, or very high? Other things you want to consider is who will be affected, what will be affected, why will it be affected, when do I need to implement this plan, when is the risk going to be high versus low, where should I start, and how did I get to this place? You also want to look, is it an internal, personal, or organizational issue, or is it an external issue with a client? Maybe there's been a change in governmental regulations which affect how your clients are doing business. You also want to look at what is involved in this risk and how will I or my organization be affected. Oftentimes, it is very helpful to look at real-life examples. So, let's think about it. Stopping for a cup of coffee in the morning when you're late. We all have had this thought in our mind. And when thinking about coffee versus being late for work, we do a mini risk assessment. What effect will me being late for work cause for myself? What effect will me being on time for work cause? If you make the decision to be late for work, there are certain consequences that you may face. If you make the decision to be on time for work, there are certain consequences which you may face. Depending upon how bad or the likelihood of these consequences actually happening will determine whether or not you'll stop for a cup of coffee. But remember, in doing that, there is no one size fits all. So different organizations and personal situations will assess risk differently. If something is low, for instance, if the likelihood of you getting fired for being late for work is low, someone might stop for that cup of coffee. If the likelihood of you getting fired is very high for being late, it is less likely for you to stop for a cup of coffee. So let's recap. The process of assessing risk can be a quantitative or qualitative process. Your types of risks may include accidental, natural, strategic, financial, or operational. There are 7 types of risk management. Also, the level of your risk will depend on the consequences that you face times your likelihood of facing them. And in assessing and risk management, there are usually 4 things that one will do. You accept the risk, you mitigate the risk, you ignore the risk, or you attempt to transfer the risk onto someone else. So thank you for joining us for the Leadership Lunch Break training on risk assessment and risk management. As always, your comments and/or suggestions are welcomed. Thank you and have a great day.